Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us. I really
Hi,
appreciate
Lynn.
it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been so excited by the idea that I get to see you again because, of course, it's been a while since being there at your second election night victory party. Definitely one of my favorites. So I just want to jump right in today, if that's all right.
Please.
The first question is just, what is your proudest accomplishment as a two-term Green MLA in Sydney, Australia, in Newtown specifically?
Yeah. Look, it's really hard, I think, for us as Greens. We come to the concept of how we want to achieve change in the world through a sense of collective action, so it always feels weird when people ask me about like my achievements, or we talk about like my election victory, because to me it's like, I know, like, you were one of the people on the campaign, like, I know that without hundreds of volunteers and people doing all of that effort, then I would not have been elected. And then all of the things that we achieve in terms of wins wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for massive amounts of community movements and campaigns before I even, was around in politics. So it feels really hard to identify a moment. But I would say that I feel like the one that is in the most sort of forefront of my mind is that last year in New South Wales, we finally managed to decriminalise abortion. And a few years before that, we managed to give an apology to the 78ers, who were the first people that marched in the Mardi Gras parade that suffered massive police brutality and violence and homophobia as a result of them trying to engage in a peaceful rally and protest down Oxford Street in Sydney at our first ever Mardi Gras back in 78. And so to me, I see those as incredible moments in our collective history around the push for equality, around LGBTIQ rights, and also around the idea of women's rights and reproductive rights. And the fact that I got to be in Parliament to be part of the apology given to those 78ers at that first Mardi Gras, and that I was in Parliament and had my name as one of the Greens members on the bill that worked to decriminalise abortion in New South Wales, feel like definitely, moments in time that I got to be a part of because of incredible Greens members being able to elect representatives to the Parliament, that then meant that we were part of not just the history at the time and those movements at the time that had been pushing for it, but also being able to achieve what was really significant change to communities, LGBTIQ communities and feminist communities here in Sydney and across, the country, because those things are significant.
Great. Thank you. And it actually leads almost perfectly into my next question, which is, if I remember correctly, you ended up having a child during your first term in Parliament. And I can only imagine that as a first-termer and as one of the relatively few women in Parliament, that meant a lot of changes. And I just wondered, I thought sometimes people are really curious, how does someone handle juggling being a mother, being a new mother, and actually being a member of Parliament?
Yeah, look, I think it's true. I laughed and said, within 2 years, I got 2 new titles. I got MP and Mum. And they were both titles that I never would have expected I would have either of them, or really planned to have either of them. So it was a big shock. In one hand, the flexibility that I have around some parts of my work make it a lot easier for me than other women. I am in a really privileged position with my role that if I need to cancel meetings on a day, then I can cancel them and I can't get the SAP. Whereas if someone's doing shift work, the risk is if you're in insecure employment and your child is sick, then you risk losing your job if you have to take the day off. So on one hand, there's a huge privilege that goes with the kind of roles that I have because I have that flexibility. On the other hand, the expectations to be out and about all the time, when Parliament's sitting, you don't have that flexibility. At events and activities, that's really tough. But it's also very tough to sort of negotiate what is your very public facing life and the realities of having sort of, you know, crusty food on your clothes while you're trying to do a news interview, or during ISO lockdown, I at one point was doing a radio interview while dancing with my daughter while she was listening to Frozen soundtrack to try and keep her distracted while I was giving my grabs. So there are definite negotiations and challenges, but I think they are challenges that all working people with young children face, particularly the pressures on women with the various, you know, challenges around the disproportionate level of care and responsibility that women lift and the mental load that women carry. And it's one of the reasons why I am such a strong advocate for free childcare, for free early childhood education, and for making sure that, you know, you should be able to access these high quality services to make sure the younger generation doesn't suffer because their parents choose to want to engage in meaningful and productive work.
Well, that's great. I mean, when I came back the second time, it was in the middle of campaign season, so I didn't have the opportunity to see you interact as much as, you know, I might normally, because of course campaigns are very, very hectic. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about something that's maybe not as positive, but is perhaps quite timely. So in your first term, I remember that there was quite a bit of racist attacks against you by the police department. Can you just share a little bit about that and also how you were able to handle it given your position?
Yeah, for sure. And I should acknowledge as well, I appreciate we're recording this, but I should acknowledge that where I'm sitting in the New South Wales Parliament today is on Gadigal land, and I would like to acknowledge that it is Gadigal land, Aboriginal land, and it was never ceded, and it is stolen land, and it's one of the struggles that is ongoing here at the moment, as I know you guys are also facing those struggles around looking at the systemic racism that exists within our society, and particularly in Australia, the injustice faced by First Nations people who have never ever had the same equity or recognition as white people and the colonisers of this country, and that needs to be acknowledged. Sadly, the New South Wales Police Force are a power unto their own, and it was absolutely rattling to me and shocking to me to discover that New South Wales Police had been trolling my Facebook page with really racist and sexist comments as a Member of Parliament. I just assumed that there were limits to people's levels of bad behaviour and racism, and it was, you know, personally really rattling, but also just fired me up to think, well, if they do this to me, what do they do to a young Aboriginal boy when no one's watching? Because if there is a level of arrogance that suggests that they're willing to do this kind of racist attack publicly to a Member of Parliament, what would they do to someone when no one's looking? And that to me demonstrates a level of real concern around the culture and the systemic racism that exists in our police force, and as we know, police forces around the world. And the fact that they are even called police forces rather than police services, the fact that simultaneously as a woman of colour and as someone who is at risk of walking down the street and potentially being assaulted or subject to a racist attack, then I'm expected to then ring the police to report that when they are the ones that have actually engaged in those attacks in the past, really undermines people's sense of security and safety. And so I use that to fuel my passion about how we need to reform the systemic racism within our justice system and our policing system. I use it to push my boundaries, and I use the rage and the anger I feel about that to push the boundaries and say, well, you know, if I'm going to be here and I'm subjected to this, then the impact it has on so many others means that I have no choice but to speak out on it and speak up on it, even if it means that I get further attacks and further criticisms. It's a very bizarre situation, but one at the moment that I feel so inspired and empowered by, because there are so many people that suffer such worse racism and discrimination than me in a lot less powerful positions. And I just take hope every day from watching those individuals and think, well, if they can do that, if they can stand up and do these things, then, you know, it's an absolute responsibility that I have to do it, and how lucky and privileged I am to be part of the movement that is actually trying to stamp out racism and discrimination once and for all.